The morning was calm, but Thomas Hale's life was anything but. He stood in the narrow kitchen of his tiny two-bedroom house, staring at a sink full of unwashed dishes, his hands trembling from exhaustion. His 7-year-old son, Aaron, sat at the worn wooden table, silently chewing on a piece of dry toast. Thomas hadn't told his son that the power company was coming to cut the electricity if he didn't make the payment by tomorrow. He hadn't told him that the garage where he worked part-time had cut his hours again. He hadn't told him that the only reason they'd have food next week was because he decided to rent out the spare room. And that's when she knocked. A soft, uncertain tap at the door changed everything. Before we dive deeper into this emotional story of kindness, survival, and unexpected miracles, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness if you believe in second chances, quiet courage, and the power of helping strangers. Your support keeps stories like this alive. Thomas opened the door, expecting maybe a college student or someone looking for a cheap place to crash. Instead, standing there was a young woman, no older than 22, soaked from the drizzle outside, her dark brown hair plastered to her forehead, her oversized coat buttoned all the way up though it couldn't hide the gentle curve of her pregnant belly. Her eyes, soft hazel, trembling with fatigue, met his with quiet desperation. "I saw your ad," she whispered, clutching a small backpack against her chest. "You still renting the room?" Thomas hesitated. Something about her didn't fit. Her voice was polished, her tone refined. Even the way she stood, graceful yet uncertain, didn't match someone who should be looking for a room in his rundown house at the edge of town. But her shoes were muddy, her coat worn at the cuffs, and her face, pale and tired, spoke of sleepless nights and hunger. "Yeah," he said softly. "Come in." Her name was Clara Wren, though she never offered her last name at first. She said she was from another city, looking for a fresh start, and that she could pay in cash weekly. That was enough for Thomas. He showed her the small room with faded wallpaper, an old bed, and a window that overlooked the backyard where Aaron had once planted sunflowers that never grew. Clara smiled faintly and said it was perfect. The days that followed were slow, ordinary, and strangely healing. Clara kept to herself at first, spending long hours sitting by the window, her hand resting protectively on her belly. But Aaron, with his innocent heart, was the first to break the silence. He'd knock on her door each morning, offering her the first drawing he made that day, a son, a house, a stick family holding hands. Clara would thank him with a smile that looked like it hadn't been used in months. Thomas noticed the small changes. The house, once quiet and heavy, started to feel alive again. Clara would sometimes hum while washing dishes or sit on the porch in the afternoons, watching Aaron play. On Sundays, she insisted on helping cook, her hands graceful as she shaped dough and stirred soup, the scent of something warm filling the rooms. For a man who had lived years in silence, her presence felt like a forgotten melody returning to a broken heart. But there was mystery in her eyes. One night, Thomas found her in the backyard, sitting under the old oak tree, tears streaking down her face as she stared at her phone's blank screen. He didn't ask questions, though he wanted to. He only handed her his old jacket and said, "It gets cold out here." She took it silently, her lips trembling with words she couldn't say. As weeks turned into months, their lives intertwined in quiet, beautiful ways. Clara helped Aaron with his schoolwork, teaching him how to paint, how to find beauty in small things. Thomas, in turn, fixed the broken latch on her window, built her a small shelf for her few belongings, and made sure she had enough to eat even when it meant going without himself. It wasn't romance, it was something deeper. It was the connection of two wounded souls rebuilding their lives in the ruins of what they'd lost. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and Clara's past was never far behind. One afternoon, while Thomas was working on an old car in the driveway, a black luxury sedan pulled up to the curb. Two men in suits stepped out, holding a photograph. "We're looking for someone," one of them said, showing the picture to Thomas. It was Clara, smiling, radiant, dressed in expensive clothes. "Her name's Clara Wrenfield," the man said. "She's been missing for months. Her family's desperate to find her." Thomas's heart froze. Wrenfield. The name echoed in his mind. Everyone in the country knew it, the family that owned the massive Wrenfield Group, one of the wealthiest in the region. Their only daughter had vanished after her engagement to a well-known businessman had been called off amid scandal. The media said she'd run away to clear her head. But now, she was standing in his kitchen every morning, pouring coffee, helping his son tie his shoelaces. Thomas swallowed hard. "Haven't seen her," he said quietly. The men left, but he stood there long after, his hands shaking. That evening, he found Clara sitting on the porch, her eyes red, as if she already knew. "They came, didn't they?" she asked softly. Thomas nodded. She sighed, looking out at the fading daylight. "I wasn't running from them because of money," she said. "I was running from a life that didn't feel like mine. My father wanted me to marry a man who didn't love me, who didn't care about this baby. I didn't even tell them I was pregnant. I couldn't bear the headlines, the pity, the shame. I just wanted to be free. To start over." Thomas listened in silence, his heart heavy. He knew what it meant to feel trapped by circumstances beyond control. After his wife died from an illness they couldn't afford to treat, he'd learned how cruel the world could be to those without power. Now, this girl, this heiress, was sitting here, stripped of all her privilege, learning the same hard truth. "I won't tell anyone," he said quietly. "You can stay as long as you need." Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Why are you being so kind?" "Because once," Thomas said, "someone was kind to me when I didn't deserve it." Winter came early that year. The roof leaked. The bills piled up. Thomas got sick one week, and Clara took over, caring for Aaron, keeping the house running, even finding small ways to earn, baking pastries she sold to a nearby cafe under a fake name. Her belly grew, her steps slowed, but her determination shone stronger than ever. Then one stormy night, Clara went into labor. The power went out, the roads were flooded, and there was no way to reach the hospital. Thomas held her hand as she screamed through the pain, whispering words of comfort, his heart breaking with fear and hope. Hours later, the cries of a newborn filled the house, a baby girl, small and perfect, her tiny fingers curling around Clara's trembling hand. Thomas had seen many things in his life, but never something as pure as that moment. Days later, as the rain cleared, a sleek car appeared again at the house. But this time, Clara was ready. She held her baby close, her eyes steady as her father stepped out, a tall, silver-haired man with worry etched across his face. "Clara," he whispered, tears streaming down. "We thought you were gone. Why didn't you come home?" She looked at him, then at Thomas and Aaron standing by the porch. "Because home isn't where there's money, Father. It's where there's kindness. Where people care for you, not what you're worth." The old man's gaze softened. He looked around the humble house, then at the man who had sheltered his daughter. "You saved her," he said quietly. "I owe you everything." Thomas shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. Just love her. And the child." Weeks later, life changed again. Clara returned to her family's estate, but not as the frightened runaway she once was. She made sure Thomas and Aaron were never forgotten. She arranged for Aaron's schooling to be fully funded, helped Thomas open his own repair garage, and visited often with her baby girl, whom she named Hope, because that was what she had found in that little house. The story of a poor single father and a runaway heiress never made the news. It stayed quietly tucked away in the folds of two hearts that had found family where they least expected it. Sometimes, life doesn't give us miracles, it gives us people who become them. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps share stories that remind us compassion still exists in this world. And before you, the morning light spilled gently through the garage windows, falling on rows of polished cars and tools neatly arranged on wooden racks. Thomas Hale wiped the sweat from his brow as he looked around his new repair shop, Hale and Hope Auto Works. The name wasn't random, it was a quiet tribute to the little girl who had brought light back into his life. Business wasn't booming, but it was honest, steady, and enough to keep food on the table. It had been 3 years since that stormy night when Clara gave birth in his small house. 3 years since she returned to her family, not as the frightened runaway but as a woman reborn. And though she had gone back to a world of wealth and power, she never truly left them behind. Letters came often, handwritten and warm, with photos of baby Hope learning to walk, to laugh, to smile. And every few months, she'd visit, not as a millionaire heiress, but as Clara, the same woman who once found safety in a stranger's kindness. But today was different. Thomas stood by the shop entrance, staring at the familiar black car that pulled up, the same one her father had driven the day she left. The door opened, and there she was. Clara stepped out, wearing a simple blue dress and a straw hat, holding a small child's hand, Hope, now a bubbly little girl with soft curls and wide curious eyes. Aaron, now 10, ran from the back of the shop the moment he saw them. "Clara," he shouted, grinning ear to ear. Hope squealed and ran to him, calling him Awi, in her baby voice. For a moment, it felt like no time had passed at all. Before we continue, if you believe that kindness never fades and that some bonds are stronger than blood, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps stories like this reach hearts that need hope. The day passed like a memory reborn. Clara helped Aaron with his homework while Thomas fixed her car's tire, though he suspected she'd intentionally damaged it just to have a reason to visit. They all had lunch together in the back garden, sunlight shimmering through the trees, the same spot where she once sat crying years ago. "So," Thomas said with a smile, "how's the big city treating you, Miss Wrenfield?" She rolled her eyes playfully. "I told you not to call me that." "It's Clara." He chuckled. "Old habits." Clara looked around the garage with quiet pride. "You did it," she said softly. "You built this from nothing." Thomas shrugged. "Not nothing. I had a reason." "2 reasons, actually," he said, glancing at Aaron and Hope chasing butterflies near the fence. Her eyes softened, glistening for a moment. "You were the first person who ever saw me as human. Not an heiress, not a scandal, just me. I'll never forget that." But as the laughter of the children echoed through the afternoon air, there was something heavy behind Clara's smile, something unspoken. That night, as she tucked Hope into the small guest bed at Thomas's house, she sat quietly by the window, staring at the moon. Thomas, passing by with a blanket, paused. "You okay?" he asked gently. Clara hesitated before turning to him. "My father's health is getting worse. He wants me to take over the company. But I don't want to go back to that life fully. It's empty, Thomas. All boardrooms and expectations. I just want to raise my daughter with peace, with the kind of love I saw here." Thomas sat opposite her, his rough hands folded in his lap. "Maybe you can do both," he said quietly. "Maybe you can make that world a better one, for her." Clara looked at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "You always make things sound so simple." He smiled faintly. "Because life isn't as complicated as people make it. You just have to choose love, every time." The next morning, she left again, leaving behind the scent of lavender and the memory of laughter. But something felt different this time. She hugged Thomas longer, her voice trembling when she said goodbye. Hope clung to Aaron, promising to come back soon. And as the car drove away, Thomas stood there watching, unaware that life was about to change once more. Weeks later, Thomas received a letter, sealed with a golden crest. Inside was a formal-looking document and a handwritten note from Clara. Dear Thomas, I've made a decision that will surprise you. I've taken over my father's position as chairwoman of Wrenfield Group, but I'm reshaping it into something meaningful, a foundation for single parents, children, and those who need second chances. I've named it the Hale Foundation. You taught me what kindness truly means. Please say yes to being a part of it. The world needs people like you to lead it. Thomas sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in his hands. He'd never been offered anything like this before, not out of pity, but out of respect. He accepted. Over the next few months, the Hale Foundation became a beacon of hope in the community. They built small shelters, offered job programs, and provided affordable housing to single parents. Thomas supervised the local projects, while Clara oversaw the national expansion. Together, they turned pain into purpose. But with their growing work came growing feelings, feelings neither dared to name. One evening, after a long day at a new shelter opening, Thomas found Clara sitting by a lake near the site, her feet bare, her dress fluttering in the wind. The setting sun painted everything in shades of orange and silver. "You always disappear when the work's done," he said, walking over. She smiled faintly. "I like the quiet. It reminds me of that first night in your house. When everything was uncertain, but for the first time, I felt safe." Thomas sat beside her. "You were brave to leave the life you had." "I wasn't brave," she whispered. "I was broken. But you helped me find pieces of myself I didn't know still existed." He looked at her, the warmth of her words sinking deep. "You gave as much back," he said quietly. "You saved me too." They sat in silence for a long time, their reflections rippling on the water. Years of unspoken emotion hung between them, not born from need, but from understanding. Then, in a quiet voice, Clara said, "Maybe Hope's name was never just for me. Maybe it was for us." The wind rustled softly. Thomas didn't reply, he didn't need to. He simply took her hand, rough and gentle, holding it for the first time. There was no promise, no confession, just two souls, finally unafraid of what they'd already become to each other. Months later, their foundation was awarded for its humanitarian work. The event was grand, with reporters and cameras flashing, but all Thomas saw was Clara, standing on stage, holding little Hope in her arms, and looking at him in the crowd. When she spoke into the microphone, her voice was steady yet emotional. "Years ago," she began, "I was lost, scared, alone, and ready to give up on the world. But one act of kindness from a stranger changed everything. He didn't just give me a room to stay in. He gave me dignity, safety, and a second chance. Today, I dedicate this achievement to that man, Thomas Hale, and to everyone who believes that compassion can rebuild lives." The room erupted in applause, but Thomas sat frozen, tears welling in his eyes. In that moment, every hardship, every sleepless night, every quiet prayer he'd whispered for a better tomorrow, it all felt worth it. Later that evening, as the guests left and the lights dimmed, Clara walked over to him. "You looked uncomfortable with all that attention," she teased softly. He chuckled. "I fix cars, not microphones." She smiled, then said quietly, "Thomas, maybe it's time we stop pretending we're from two different worlds." He looked at her, and for the first time, didn't look away. That night, under the soft glow of the moonlight, the poor single father and the runaway heiress finally stood side by side, not as savior and saved, but as equals, bound by kindness, respect, and love that had been growing for years. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. They still faced challenges, raising children, managing work, healing from old wounds, but now they faced them together. The house that once echoed with silence now overflowed with laughter, the sound of Aaron's jokes and Hope's giggles filling every corner. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, Clara would sit by the porch with Thomas, holding his hand as the sun dipped below the horizon, whispering, "You changed my life." He'd smile, his eyes soft with gratitude, and reply, "No, you reminded me why life's worth living." Because some stories don't